You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality. Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnstone, and with me this week I have Mark.
Hello.
And I have Gareth.
Hello.
And we are concluding the first series of Blake 7. We've done 1 of 4 series, or at least we will have done in about an hour's time. It's been great talking about the first series of Blake 7. It's been nice to take these odd little Doctor Who breaks and other audio-y stuffy breaks and just do something slightly different. And I've enjoyed the series overall. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. We'll probably sort of look at the series as a whole at some point, but right now we're going to dive straight in and we're going to move on to our next episode. And our next episode is Bounty. It's a bit of an oddity bounty. I like it. I do like it, but it's a bit weird. It's kind of a story of two halves. The two episodes seem to be, the two halves, I should say, seem to be quite different to each other. It's almost like it was written as a Doctor Who two-parter, like everything just changes up after 25 minutes or so. So the first half, it's about Blake rescuing President Sarkov, and then the second half, Sarkov kind of sits on the Liberator while it's invaded by the Amagons, who Jenna seems to know, have history with. But it's quite strange. It kind of just meshes two adventures together that aren't particularly linked. There's some thematic stuff that runs through it, and to be perfectly honest, in terms of thematic stuff, this is one of the heavier Blake 7 episodes, but yeah, it's a strange one. I like it. It kind of doesn't have the whole half an hour of flying around in the Liberator at the start of the episode. We're kind of straight in. The episode opens and the team are kind of arriving to rescue Sarkov already. Sarkov's played, incidentally, by T.P. McKenna, who Doctor Who fans will know from The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. This is one of, I think, my favourite of the season. Not overall favourite, but it's up there. It's one of the better ones. It's sort of, just as we're coming to the end of the first series and things started to feel a bit stale, it just gives us something a bit different. It uses the format a bit differently and has maybe a little more to say than some other stuff has. And I'm going to see if Gareth agrees with me now. Go ahead, Gareth, talk to us about Bounty.
So, for some reason, whenever I think about this one, the thing I remember is that it's got a car in it, like an old-fashioned car. It's got a nice kind of country house in it. And I always sort of think they wrote this episode because they went, I can get a car and a nice country house. How the hell do we fit that into Blake 7? But it does fit that stuff in quite well. I would agree, I think, with the idea that the two plots don't exactly match up. But at this point in the series, I think I was just so excited that everyone got something to do that I kind of didn't mind. So on the one hand, you've got Blake and Callie, who gets to use her telepathy a bit, trying to rescue Sarkov. The telepathy is still a bit of a mixed blessing, because there's a bit where she kind of uses it to tell Blake that somebody's coming. That only works that way round. So Blake can't tell her somebody's coming. So it's one of those funny little gizmos, that telepathy. It's a slight struggle to get it to be useful. But the rescue of Sarkov kind of helps us with the whole Federation thing. And it's interesting to watch him try and talk somebody off the fence and say, you need to get involved again. And the guy doesn't want to. which I think is fair. And one of the things I like about Blake 7 is when they go, there are normal people, and they say there are people who aren't obsessed with all of this one way or the other. They do just want to live their lives, and Sarkov is kind of an example of that. And Blake ends up kind of doing the thing he did in Breakdown, where he threatens that doctor with destroying his hands. In this one, he takes Sarkov's precious collection of Earth stuff, which is the reason we have the funky car and all of that, and he starts smashing things. And he says, I'll just keep doing this if you don't go back to the fight. And it's interesting. I like that there's some consistency here of going, Blake is kind of played like this avuncular Robin Hood character who can do no wrong, but he is capable of being pretty cruel if he thinks it will advance the cause. So all of that stuff I think is interesting. The stuff on the Liberator I think is, it's not terribly related, but it does give the crew something to do. I like the fact that Gan's first impulse when there's a kind of a mission to do, he says basically, I'll go over and it doesn't really matter if I get killed. Someone else can come after me, which is a little bit kind of depressing for Gan, but it's nice that he's gung-ho about all of this. It's worth saying that Gan does then immediately get them all into deadly danger. If he just hadn't bothered going into this trap, then it would have been fine. But oh well, like I said, at least he's willing to take one for the team. There's a nice creepy moment where Villa is kind of seemingly the only one left who has to take some heroic action, and for a moment you're kind of imagining this Die Hard with Villa episode. I think I would have that would have been my favourite of the season if that had happened, I think, quite easily.
We were robbed.
We were robbed, yes, we should have had Die Hard with Villa. I've only just thought of that now, and I'm immediately mourning the episode we never got. So hang on, there's a really great line as well. When he's eventually captured, he says to Avon, I told you I couldn't do it. And Avon says, I believed you all along. Which, yeah, bless those two. They're holding this series up higher. So you've got this gang of, I think, unfortunately ethnic choice made when it comes to the gang, but depends how much you want to read into that. This gang of bounty hunters, there's the title. And it turns out that Jenna used to work for this gang. So immediately Jenna has got more to do than usual. So she's apparently siding with the gang, which none of us are going to surely believe this, but the gang, the Blake's crew all immediately think she's a turncoat. But anyway, it's a good one for Sally and Ivet because she gets to try and manipulate this guy. And the plots do eventually kind of bump into each other. It comes to a head with Sarkov being forced to take up arms against this villain, this kind of chic character. And that sort of solidifies for him, I suppose. Tough, I've got to rejoin the fight. So I think they get away with it, the two plots. They kind of mash them together at the end there. The bit that I think lets it down is the actual ending, where they go, right, Sarkov, back to your planet to sort of start working on the old tyranny thing. And much like Avalon, I think that's it for Sarkov. I mean, I might be wrong, please correct me, but I don't think we hear from him again, which is another strange little bit of world building where they kind of almost do it, but then kind of don't. And is it bad? I don't know. It's they're spinning lots of plates. They're going, you've got people like Avalon out there, you've got people like Sarkov out there. As long as that all goes somewhere, that's fine. I'm not convinced it does, though. But I suppose you could put that down to it's only the first series and they're still kind of feeling around and seeing what they want to do with all of this. So I do think it's a bit let down just from the overall context of the ending. Kind of going, well, I don't know if this really means anything. But I think it's colourful. I don't mind the two plots. As I say, anything to make sure that everybody in the episode has something to do, I think is very valuable. That's an improvement. If we can make sure that nobody is twiddling their thumbs on the Liberator, then the episode isn't a total loss. So yeah, I would agree. I think it's a fun one.
I think it's probably the episode of this series that does kind of have everybody involved in the action somehow, and it's it is good to see that they can do that and bring in other characters, because we do have Sarkov and we do have Tice as well, who join the Liberator for the week and then, as you say, disappear. I was half tempted to sort of keep you hanging on there and go, oh, well, look out for Sarkov's appearance in a future series, because it's not going to happen. Mark, talk to us about Bounty.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting one. Exactly the same thing as Gareth. I always, whenever I think of this one, it's that first half of the episode that's most clearly in my memory, and in fact, to the extent that I actually watched this. Originally, we were going to record this episode of the podcast a few weeks ago, and just logistics and things, but and because Blake Seven fades a little more quickly from the mind than Doctor Who does, um, in terms of where the episodes sort of delineate from one another. I had to go back in more recent days there, like literally just half a week ago there, and rewatch them again. And in the interim, like literally just a few weeks, I'd completely forgotten. It was about the back end of this episode being the one with the the space Arabs, for want of a better term, and yeah, the kind of not ideal nature of that. But yeah, there's a few things sort of that stand out to me in this one, beyond what Gareth very comprehensively covered. Some of them are frivolous, and some of them have a wee bit more substance, perhaps. But I'll do a frivolous one to start with. I noticed Callie is the first to really break ranks with the uniform costume thing for away missions. She is in the most extraordinary leopard skin outfit or something there. Just we haven't quite made it to the end of season one, and already the camper away mission outfits are starting to creep into things. I don't know. Maybe she thinks she'll be more camouflaged in the woods in that thing or something, but I'm not sure it's working for her. Anyway, so I think right at the start of this episode too, while she is scoping out this folly or whatever it's called, I don't know if that's, by the way, a symbolic thing that it's set in this kind of isolated folly, because is that to kind of echo the sort of the wordplay of the folly of trying to evade one's moral responsibility as a leader or whatever, as Sarkov is doing. But yeah, I think this is. I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time that we have one of these characters that will continue to come up occasionally from henceforth in the series, a kind of like a Z tier Federation commander he's not one of the big league guys. He's just this guy doing his job, and there's a really nice line in the writing and the performance of just this bloke who's somewhat phoning it in, but knows he needs to do enough to just not get court-martialed and make sure that a tight ship is running this planet. And it's a bit of a sort of a meaningless tangent here, but that particular actor, his face and his manner, for some reason, put me strongly in mind of the actor Kevin Eldon. I don't know if anybody knows that guy. He's sort of sardonic comedy performer that turns up in things, usually things alongside Stuart Lee and so on. Anyway, he put me in mind of him, but that's neither here nor there. There's something in the construction of this one that reminded me. It actually seems to be almost in miniature. The concept that Terry Nation would later reference as being the idea he had for how he would have continued Blake Seven, in maybe the mid '80s or something. I have to tiptoe around spoilers here, but he would have done something that essentially was analogous to Napoleon's imprisonment on Elba Island for a primary, a main character from the series, and then that character being broken out of this this kind of gilded cage, so to speak. And I just thought that's interesting. We've got that here, and Terry never wanted to sort of not recycle a good idea. Clearly kept that one in his back pocket for a potential revival, or so we're told, courtesy of at least one cast member. Um, so, oh yeah, I really like the set design inside the folly or whatever it is. There's this lovely grayscale aesthetic to it, with just these little pops of color, and then your eye is drawn to all these different things, which are obviously relics of old Earth. And what's really nice is some of those things are, is historically invaluable things, like the reassembled portrait of Winston Churchill. I never ever noticed that. I wonder how many people did. It actually took the Blu-ray extras to point that one out to me, and it's a lovely touch that they included that. But you've also got things like basic cutlery utensils and things like that. Fairly basic looking cutlery, just in a display case, and these things, it tells you so much in just a little tiny, concise visual image of what the Federation has done to civilization. That these things are sort of, anyway. I just thought that was a nice touch too. Obviously, some really good two-hander scenes for Gareth Thomas and TP McKenna. They play off each other beautifully in this thing. And we have diegetic music used for, I think, the first time since the way back. I could be wrong, but I think it's the first time we've had it, with the playing of the records. And talking of music, Dudley Simpson has some really beautifully melancholic music that seeps in at points in this. It really stands out in a way that goes against. This isn't really to criticize his normal approach, but I think it's fair to say that Dudley's music often feels like a kind of musical wallpaper. But here, it's almost like, I don't know, certain things seem to just bring him alive, and he steps outside of his usual approach, as he did with City of Death and Doctor Who. And this kind of feels a wee bit like that in terms of some of the music. So I just wanted to give that a bit of a heads up, or a bit of recognition. There's a thing in this where, oh yes, I think, Gareth, forgive me, I think you already sort of covered this somewhat, but I did think that was a nice bit of continuity. I hope I'm not just repeating you, and that there's a sort of a carryover from Breakdown, insofar as we have seen that ruthlessness in Blake, with the threat to break the surgeon's hands, and now we have him breaking records, and that act seems just as cold blooded, really, given how much these things have come to mean as sort of consolations in this imprisonment for Sarkov. Now, the character of Tice, maybe it's just me, but both times I watched this recently, well, sorry, the first time I rewatched it again recently, it wasn't at all clear to me that she was his daughter. That seems to, she calls him father very near the end of the episode, and I wondered, did they hold that back deliberately to keep the nature of their relationship ambiguous, or was it supposed to be kind of self-evident in the way they interact? To me, it never really was self-evident until that moment. So I just find that kind of curious in a way. It's an interesting thing, that they did it that way.
I had the same thing, just to say.
Did you have that?
Complete surprise. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah,
They were related.
I was thinking, like, is it just me that I'm reading that slightly differently? I wasn't sure exactly what I was reading. It wasn't necessarily that there was something, some May to December romance thing going on, but I couldn't work out exactly what it was. Was it a friendship? Was it just a collegiate thing? Was it? I don't know. But yeah, that's good to know. I wasn't alone in being confused by that one. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the key ones I have to say about that, because I don't want to risk too much repetition of what is both very adequately covered there. It wasn't more than adequately covered between yourselves. But yeah, it's an enjoyable one. I think it's very much a game of two halves, because that thing with the Jenna appearing to betray them, but like, who's going to believe that? And they do try to lampshade it a little bit. They do have, I can't remember which character it is that sort of says, that they don't really believe it, but I think they're kind of going like, it's kind of the script putting its hand up and saying, we don't have time to rewrite this with more finesse just now. So somebody's going to say out loud what you're thinking, and hopefully that is forgiven. But yeah, I think that's all the main thoughts I have, and I'll shut up and we'll get moving on to the next one.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about the father reveal at the end of it. It is a bit of a strange one, but I quite like it how it sort of it does explain the relationship between the two characters. Adds a little bit to it, I guess. Yeah, Bounty's a good one. I like Bounty. It does something a little different. And so does this next episode, actually. Like, I like the format Deliverance uses, which again, it sort of floats two plots at once. But just to make things a tad more interesting, one plot is basically setting up for the finale. It's kind of part one of two. Whereas the other plot is its own completely independent thing and is resolved by the end of the episode. So, yeah, half of this is part one and the other half's sort of a self-contained episode of Blake 7. And I have to admit, I think the Deliverance plot, the one that is wrapped up by the end of the episode, isn't the strongest that Blake 7 ever did, although it does give us the sort of funny moments of somebody believing that Avon is a deity. That's always a giggle, and Avon's reaction to it, and everyone else's reaction to it. But we also get this kind of, it sort of harks back to Seek, Locate, Destroy a little bit. We get this kind of Servalan and Travis sat around plotting, and sort of, giving the audience a little bit of exposition as to what's going to happen this week and next week. We get Servalan at her most ruthless. We've had ruthless Travis so far. We've not necessarily had ruthless Servalan so far. So this is Servalan going ruthless. She has a couple of, or a loyal Federation doctor and a civilian killed. Turns out this was the doctor that sort of sorted Travis out when he needed major surgery, which gives us a nice little, kind of the only time that Travis has cared about anybody, and the only time Travis does care about anybody really. There's just that little sort of human moment of regret. I really like that. I think it's a neat touch. So yeah, it's an episode of two halves, I think, this one. I like the sort of stuff that's tying in with Ensor and Orac and is going to lead us into the finale. The Deliverance stuff is a little bit thin, but it fills half an episode and gives half the crew something to do when otherwise they would have just been milling about and not doing much. So it gets points for that. It's kind of difficult to talk about this one without going into Orac as well, because, like I say, a lot of stuff carries over. But for now, we will just stick to Deliverance. Gareth, go ahead.
So I think this one, for me, suffers from the thing that you mentioned about Bounty, which is the multiple plot lines. I actually completely forgot this episode. So going into it, I really had to sort of rack my brains to think, what am I missing? And I think that's because I don't really see any connection between the two plots, and neither of the plots really amounts to anything. I mean, there is some setup, but yeah. So primarily, you've got Blake and co. seeing some escape pods, and kind of, I don't know if it's out of character, but somewhat randomly going, right, we're going to go and investigate that. There's no indication that I think that it's got anything to do with the Federation and stuff. Maybe they are just being kind of Robin Hood and co. just going in to help. But they go in and investigate, and they find one of the escaped people is dead, and the other one is Ensor. And this guy is desperate to get back to his dad and provide some medication that will help him, and then decides to take Callie hostage in order to force Blake to pilot the Liberator to go and see his dad, which is a state of affairs that you kind of think, well, they were going to do that. So it's a weird dilemma to set up, because you've got this guy, the actor's Tony Cornter. I think I'm saying that right. He's been in Doctor Who. He's a good, reliable actor. He's really doing his best with a guy who's kind of very unwell and injured, trying to hold it together long enough to get his this medicine to his dad. So it's it's a decent attempt at making it dramatic. But I kept thinking, well, what's the reason for this? Like, why? You've been told that this spaceship can get you there lightning fast if you just let Avon and co get up. So what's the insane urgency here? So I sort of struggled with it. It was like this life or death situation that's kind of arisen just because. And of course, Ensor, he eventually dies of his injuries, at which point Blake just goes, right, well, let's go back. So the whole thing is pointless. And it does tell us that we have this bloke who's going to need some medication, which could be interesting, that situation, what's going on there. This leads us into the last episode. But yeah, it's a real running in place kind of plot line, and I think that's probably the case with the whole episode. I suspect it was, Terry Nation had just enough puff to kind of get 12 ideas out of this series, and maybe got caught out and went, oh no, we need to stretch another one, because the other plot is very, very left field. You have Avon and co, and I do take your point that again the whole gang has something to do. So again, you do have to kind of give them props, because it's really hard to wrangle half a dozen main cast members. So they end up on this planet, which obviously looks a little bit like a quarry, and they have to navigate these mutants because there's been some sort of nuclear war. There's some sort of fallout causing mutants, because that's Terry Nation's favorite thing. And the gang gets separated, and Jenna ends up being a prisoner, but the episode pretty much forgets about her, which is a sort of sad contrast to Bounty, where she kind of came into her own. I think Bounty's probably the strongest showing for Jenna in the season. But anyway, Avon is kind of leading the action down on the planet, because he's found this rather strange woman living in a cavern who is overlooking some sort of race bank in order to launch it into space and reboot her civilization. And she's decided that Avon is this prophesied god, which is obviously a case of affairs that suits both Avon and Paul Darrow quite visibly. He's having a nice time playing this particular situation. Yeah, so you're just watching this really quite strange thing unfold, where Avon has to arrange for this race bank to get shot off into space, whilst elsewhere a bloke is pointing a gun at Callie's head. And yeah, these unlike the situation in Bounty, where Sarkov gets to have a gun in his hand and say, I've got to take action. These two plots never come together. They eventually launch the race bank, and then kind of hilariously we just don't find out what happened to the woman. We just cut straight to the Liberator and go, well, all's well that ends well. It's one of those kind of breakdown endings where everyone's all jolly, but they do at least have somewhere to go. Yeah, so all of it just feels, to me anyway, I'm sure Mark's got some interesting angles on it, but to me it feels like a pile of stuff. But in amongst all of that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, John T, the scene with Travis. Now, I will say that I don't think they make enough of the fact that he was effectively fired or suspended between episodes. So, he wasn't... Travis is a man with a mission, and that's all he's got. And to have that taken away is very interesting. What happens to Travis in that situation? This is not a question that seems to have been explored. So, Travis kind of just went on the shelf, and now he's been picked up off the shelf to go back into action again. So that's unfortunate. But you have this amazing scene where Servalan, who, the scene kind of serves both of them, because it makes it clear that Servalan is such a far gone monster that she's more than happy to just kill people on her own side to further her own ambitions. And yeah, Stephen Greif, I should say, gets to have this moment of grief where he kind of goes, oh, that was the doctor who saved my life. And it's one of a few moments in the season, I should say, where Stephen Greif gets to give Travis this kind of weird humanity that you wouldn't think would be there, because he's such a machine hell bent on kind of killing Blake and all of this stuff. So suddenly, out of all of that, to have him kind of express emotions is very well done and very interesting. So that's my favorite thing in the episode. It's got nothing to do with the crew. Just this little psychodrama between Servalan and Travis. So yeah, I would kind of recommend the episode just for that scene. The rest of it, it's fine. But until I hear otherwise, I'm going to subscribe to the idea that this one was a little bit cobbled together to bridge the episode 11 to episode 13 gap and get us there to the end. Yeah, I don't love it, unfortunately.
It does have to be said that I do find that in this episode, let's call it part one of the finale for the sake of what I'm about to say, and Star 1, the finale to Series 2, which I do think is a hell of a lot better than anything in Series 1, actually. The most interesting parts are Servalan sat in her office, which is interesting. Like, Blake's 7 finales tend to have Servalan sat in an office while exciting stuff happens. Certainly these first 2 series. And Servalan in her office is the most interesting bit. In this case, it's just her plotting with Travis. And in the case of Star 1, it's her sort of behind the scenes while a coup's happening. Obviously, we'll get to Star 1 in hopefully the not too distant future. But yeah, back to this. Mark, talk us through Deliverance.
Well, I actually really do like this one. I've always liked it, and I think it is largely down to that Avon situation, because I just find that so fascinating that he's presented with this situation. In fact, it's quite interesting that it comes straight off the back of him having a moment of, it's a very rare moment, really, of him being slightly humiliated by circumstance and even guilt tripped, which is a very rare thing. He's seldom put in that position. And there's this moment where he realizes he's messed up. Jen has been left behind on the planet, and he says, "Well, I'll go back down and look for her." And Blake says, "Yes, you better had," and he says it so bitingly, and everyone has no response. He just looks at him with, he looks very sort of cowed by it, and I just think, wow, that's new. Like, you get these little interesting reversals, like the one with Servalan and Travis, where he's kind of queasy about her ruthlessness, which actually slightly echoes that thing he had with the oh gosh, what do you call them? The vampire people that sort of serve under him. That time in Duel where she had no interest about her previous life that had been stolen, and he looked queasy.
Mutoids.
The mutoids. Thank you so much. That was going to drive me crackers, and I couldn't think of that. I appreciate that. It seems to echo that in some way. So we do get these. Yeah, it's very rare, and here we have a very rare moment of Avon being absolutely on the back foot, feeling guilty, and but his ego does not have to suffer for too long, because look at what is delivered to him. Pretty much immediately, somebody who's prepared to not only value him but worship him, and this sort of instant reversal of fortune should bring, and I think it initially does bring him some sort of, it restores his ego and even boosts it a bit. But I think he actually, I'm not entirely sure that he is enjoying it as much as some of the lines seem to suggest. I don't know whether it's down to Paul Darrow's performance or if it's somewhat in the writing, but I think the clue is in the end, where he's asked directly about that, how did it feel, to be treated as a god or seen as a god, and he's able to sort of, because he's back on form at this point, he's able to sort of spit back at Blake, well, don't you know, and then sort of saunters off, kind of morosely lost in thought. I also really like, by the way, that there's this brilliant line, where Megat is talking so praiseworthily about his having brought about the prophecies and everything at the end. And she says, all of this brought you to us, and he says that somehow seems a very poor reward, and he means it. He's not being flippant. He feels like here's this very pure soul, and they've just come and been like the worst, Timu version of fulfilling the prophecy that you could get, and I don't think he is entirely comfortable, but I think it's too much for his ego in recovery mode not to let those comments from from Gan and from Villa, when they're kind of ribbing him a bit about why you, and why not us and all that, and the poor woman's lost her mind and all this, and he sort of plays against that, but I think he he somewhat feels unworthy too. He's just never going to say that in their presence. So other wee things in this episode. Well, this is back to the more frivolous stuff in a way, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love a snowy planet, and before we had a planet that was intentionally written as a winter planet, and I think this is the first time where we actually have one that just coincidentally happens to have had a snowfall just before filming, because I think it might have been filmed around January, February, something around 78, somewhere around there. And they've just had a really hard frost and a bit of snowfall, and it transforms that landscape and makes it so much more visually arresting. And it's almost a bit like that good fortune that Graham Harper got was Revelation of the Daleks, where an already quite interesting location suddenly becomes 10 times more so because of what that does, and it's impossible to imagine any other kind of visual for that episode after that. So I love that little bit of happenstance. Now, the guest character, thanks for reminding me that actor's name was Tony Conter, Gareth, because I had just written down Roy Evans because I couldn't remember offhand. Yes, so Roy Evans isn't that right? Isn't that what he was called in EastEnders? Anyway, not that I watch EastEnders, but I just know he was in it for years as that character. Anyway, he's there, and he has his accident and everything. He's thrown down in this escape capsule, barely survives. And I've written here, I'm not sure why he initially has to talk in the manner of a telegram when he's conserving his energy, because it's not really, I don't think it's really saving him any effort to have to think of these very almost ludicrously concise little statements. He's like, battery packs safe. And there's almost like, you can always imagine like stop after that, and then he's like, Federation will pay full price. It's almost like, who's that guy in Claws of Axos, that talks in full sentences when he's unconscious. It's like the inverse of that, where he's still conscious, but he's talking in these really artificially bullet pointed phrases. But then minutes later he's fine, and he's still in bad condition, but he's talking in paragraphs at that point. So I don't know what's going on with that little change, but that's just one little wrinkle of the thing, and it's more amusing than anything else. I'm not sure I have much else to say about it. Another kind of silly thing that I enjoyed was there's a wee throwaway moment in this, and I think it's easy to overlook these things that sit outside the structure of the plot, that are there just to be a bit of business really, and show that these characters have lives outside of their missions and so on. And it's just this bit where Blake and Callie are sitting waiting for some sort of message coming back up from the planet, and Callie's sitting listening to just like a very early version of the Walkman or something. It's just sitting there, and but the music is absolutely blasting out of this thing in a way where you're thinking those are really leaky headphones, or she's turned that up so loud she's going to make herself deaf, because you can hear everything from the implied distance of the control desk, But yeah, and simultaneously, it's by coincidence really, but Gareth Thomas happens to have his head in his hands, and it looks like he's gone, oh God, could you not just turn that down? Anyway, I just enjoyed that for the bit of silliness that it was. Yeah, but I think I do enjoy it. I enjoy it, as I say, mostly for that Avon plot and the situation it puts him in. And it's always, funny enough, been one of the most memorable episode endings out of the whole of Blake Seven for me, because it is that bit where, I think, you're saying, Gareth, it kind of ends in almost a bit of a jolly way, but I'm not sure. I can sort of see what you mean by that, but it's like there's a bit of back to business sort of briskness on the bridge, but it's this little business of um, the kind of pointed statement and riposte about being, what's it like to have been treated as a god or seen as a god, the discomfort in that and the burden of responsibility. It's kind of glibly covered, intentionally glibly covered, and then as they start to resume business on the bridge, you've got Paul Darrow just walking off with his hands behind his back, just lost in thought. And I just think that is brilliant as a last shot. It's that contrast of two elements that really makes that stick in my memory as something quite special. And then boom, straight into the credits. So yeah, it's up there with one of the my favorites from the season, I think.
I think, like all episodes in this series, really, it has great moments. And as we move on into the next series, we're going to find that most of those great moments are focused pretty much purely on Avon and Villa. I think it's starting to show here anyway, certainly Avon. I do love the sort of Avon going into full, or I should say Paul Darrow going into full, if I played James Bond, this is what you'd be getting, guys, mode with Miga. I just absolutely love it. Like, he completely rises to that, like, yes, I am Paul Darrow and I am a deity. It's absolutely brilliant. Let's move on to the finale then. Let's complete our first series of Blake 7. This is Orac, which it's a bit of a slow, ploddy finale, actually. I don't think it lives up to the build-up that we get in Deliverance. Like, I think the most interesting part about this whole finale sort of cycle is Travis and Servalan sat around in an office plotting. We land on a planet where the aim is to get to Ensor Senior and Orac, whatever Orac is, we're not quite sure to start with. And kind of, yeah, we get to the planet, half the crew are dying of radiation, we need to get a cure as quickly as possible. And the majority of the episode, we've got half the Liberator crew lying around being not very well. We've got Servalan and Travis wandering around a beach and some stock 70s BBC cave set. Same goes for Blake as well. We get to Ensor, he promptly dies, and the prize of the whole thing is Orac, who joins the crew, and for a few episodes now we're going to be Blake's 8 with 2 computers. Doesn't last long, as we'll find out when we get to Series 2, but all in all, it kind of feels like this is wrapping up the prologue to Blake 7 that has been Series 1. I think the moment we get Orac is actually the moment Blake 7 starts to be Blake 7, and maybe it's because Season 2 is just a little bit more confident, and 3 in particular builds on that, and 4 kind of is a little bit of a reboot but sticks to the safe format. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a big epic finale. And then when we get to Series 2, we have this ongoing story thread that goes through most of the series, and it does lead to a big explosive finale. So I guess, I don't know, I guess I was expecting a little bit more of this when I first watched it, because Deliverance works so hard to set it up. But actually, all Deliverance really does is give us a bit of context as to what's happening. And this kind of falls into running around caves territory. Even sort of the way it ends for Travis and Servalan's a little bit status quo-y. It's, well, we're going to escape from being buried under here, and then I'm going to bury you. It's kind of the same every week now. You know, Travis is the underling who's going to get punished for his failure in this episode and then turns up again later absolutely fine. I suppose next time he turns up, he looks and sounds like a completely different actor. It's a real shame that this is kind of the one Stephen Greif goes out on, because it's the one where his Travis is kind of the least effective, really. So I don't dislike this. I don't dislike anything that we've discussed. Really, I don't particularly dislike any Blake 7. There's a couple of episodes in seasons 3 and 4 that are really going to challenge me, but it's all watchable. But unfortunately, I think, watchable is probably the best way I can describe this one. It just doesn't quite hit the mark for me, and it certainly doesn't quite scratch the itch that Deliverance set up. So, Gareth, one last time for this season, talk to us about Orac.
I think it's one of those where it's tempting to say don't think of it as a season finale, because that term might suggest a bit of grandeur these days that isn't automatically applicable in older TV shows. Orac isn't any kind of sort of all singing, all dancing episode. It doesn't do anything major. It does change the status quo a bit, because we're going to get Orac, the titular computer, and it certainly changes the status quo in terms of creating a cliffhanger, which is that the Liberator seemingly will be destroyed in the near future, which is something Orac is able to tell them. So that stuff is interesting, and I get it that is worth putting out there. As an episode, though, I'm also quite underwhelmed by it. It's nice to have Servalan and Travis kind of taking part, but there isn't really anything interesting to take part in. So they want Orac as well. Blake 7 want Orac. That's kind of it. The two gangs want to get hold of it. And this results in quite a poor showing, I think, for Servalan and Travis, where they're stuck in a cave at one point, being menaced by the Subterrons, which are creatures who live in subterranean areas. Slightly pitiful looking lizard monster, I think. And, there's this moment of kind of Jackie Pierce maybe thinking, oh, I don't know if this is quite the heights of Servalan's brilliance that we've seen before. And Travis doesn't really get a lot of opportunities here, because he has to be second in command. And I know he is, by definition, but normally when we see Travis, he's either having an interesting conversation with Servalan, where the sort of who is the worst question comes up, or he's in charge of someone who he can sort of boss around or bully, or there could be someone who idolizes him, like in Seek, Locate, Destroy, where you've got relatively normal people who seem to think Travis is pretty great. Actually, you don't get that here. You just get Travis and Servalan kind of tromping through a cave. So I just think as a villain aspect, it's pretty pants. And at the end, there is that kind of next time Gadget kind of thing again, where you kind of go, this is starting to get a little bit embarrassing for you guys, because you lose quite a lot. And of course, it's our last sight of Stephen Greif in Blake 7, which is tremendously sad. It was just scheduling conflicts in the end, it sounds like, the reason he didn't come back. But I think I'm right in saying the last shot of Travis in this is just him having this kind of quizzical little smile on his face, which I like to think in some way is Stephen Greif going, well, as much as I love the Subterrons, it's not so bad to get out of here. I know that's not true, because I think he probably would have come back if he could, but that's how I read it. For Blake and the rest of the team, there's a slightly odd plot where they're all getting very sick from the previous episode's radiation, which is a nice little carryover. Again, Terry Nations found radiation sickness interesting as far back as the Daleks. The idea that you can get a medicine where you just take a pill and it's fine is also a nice futuristic idea that clearly appeals to him, because again, that was also in the Daleks. So it gives you a nice little incentive for Blake to go and find Ensor Senior. Adorably, he has exactly the same name as his son in the previous episode, because they just kind of go, well, he's clever, he'll probably have some medication, which is a little bit strange, really, that the Liberator doesn't. You kind of think, oh, all of a sudden the Liberator, it's fallen short. And it's worth saying, sometimes the Liberator is a bit pants. There's a bit in Bounty where Zen is he's able to identify that Gan's voice print is a fake, but he's not able to identify how many people there are or where they are. I just think, yeah, Zen is a curiously spotty computer, which is maybe where Orac comes in later on. So yeah, there's a decent enough reason for Blake to go and get this Ensor guy and sort of race against time against Travis and Serverland. So I like that aspect. And once they meet him, I think the actor's name is Derek Farr, who plays Ensor. And for now, he voices Orac, but I'm assuming Peter Tuddenham will take over later. He's a wonderful cantankerous presence. I really enjoyed his scenes. This once again, after the guy in Bounty, Sarkov, we've got another person living in a strange kind of isolation, which seems to be the sort of status quo in the Blake 7 world. You're either part of the Federation, you're a slave for the Federation, or you're some kind of weird outlier. And Ensor is another weird outlier. And yeah, they're in this bizarre situation where they have to break the news that his son has died, and they kind of, pointedly don't say, and he was a nutcase, by the way. I mean, he really went very strange in his efforts to rescue you. And then they kind of go, right, well, we'll rescue Ensor as well as Orac, quietly thinking, oh, this Orac thing could be pretty handy. But in a moment of not exactly impressiveness, they managed to take so long to do this that Ensor just dies of his heart troubles, which is a bit. I can understand they don't particularly want to carry this guy around, and if he survived, he probably wouldn't have wanted them to keep Orac. But that's the end of the episode. They get Orac, and this is the point where I'm interested to rewatch Series 2, because right now I think I have the same question I had when I first watched Series 1, which was, they've already got a supercomputer, why do they need two? And it's going to be a situation where they're both even voiced by the same guy. So it's a curious idea that they find out what this Orac thing is, and it's another godlike computer. But admittedly, Orac is seemingly more capable than Zen. Yeah, it's a funny episode, isn't it? It's not very big. It's not very exciting. I think it probably does deserve sort of plaudits, because you mentioned Star 1, the not just the final episode of Series 2, but as you say, kind of a running theme. Maybe the best thing about Orac and Deliverance as a two-parter is this germ of an idea, where you can go, we can introduce something and have that tick along in the background of the season and then pay off later. In this case, it's only 2 episodes, but in Series 2, I'm not going to commit myself to how many episodes, I don't remember. It's probably not that many, but it carries on for a couple of episodes, and yeah, maybe that's the best thing to come out of it, apart from Orac himself. It's just this idea that you can have a plot ticking along. So I'll be interested to dive back into Series 2 and see how Orac fits in, because obviously they can't. Getting the entire gang to work is difficult at the best of times. Introducing Orac potentially makes it harder, but we shall see. But yeah, it's a very muted kind of last episode, but fortunately, it's not the last episode of Blake 7, so it's okay. There are much better finales to come after this one.
I think every other last episode of the season of Blake 7 is a sort of dedicated, explosive, and actually, when you think about it, quite ahead of its time series finale. And this isn't. This is just part 2 of. Not even that. It's part 1.5 of. I don't know. But yeah, it's. You're right. It does sort of perhaps give them the confidence to explore a more in-depth story and carry ideas over between episodes in the next season. Overall, I think, from that point of view, it's a success. I just don't think it does much while doing that successfully, I guess. Anyway, Mark, talk to us about Orac.
Okay, well, there's a really clunky and hilarious thing at the start of this episode where we get, and it is because this is one of BBC Sci-Fi's first attempts at connective tissue between episodes in any serious way, as you were saying. But because of that, they seem to think that we need, and maybe it's fair enough because we're aeons before the streaming age or even the video recorder or things like that. And so they have this thing where Blake does his equivalent of the captain's log, which he's never ever done before. He says, as you know, the events so far have been, and he has this sort of, he's talking in a very sort of mannered way into this microphone thing while he plays some footage of the previous week's episode. And Avon is invited to sit down and watch him do this, and then about 2 minutes later, he he concludes doing this, and the cherry on the cake of all this is just like Avon looks at him. There's a beat that passes, and then he just goes, "Well," just that one word of like, "What are you telling me this for? I already know. I already know this." But it's really I don't know. It's trying to do that thing where like we're filling in an audience that might not have watched it last week. Avon is now as concisely as possible going to try and sidestep what just happened, and we're going to do it in a way that snaps you straight back into the character dynamics. So I had a lot of fun with that, but it really, it has even less finesse than those. They used to do this thing. I'm old enough to remember the days when on the BBC, continuity announcement before Doctor Who would start, they sometimes have these little still 2 or 3 still images recapping the previous week's episode, and they'd say, the Doctor and Perry have landed on the planet Jaconda, or whatever, and you get, and at least that sat outside the episode, clunky as it was, but this has it brought into the front end of the thing, and it's kind of, it's dumb, but it's enjoyable, I'm not sure I would change it because it's so funny. There's you were mentioning both before about the the radiation conceit, which is always a Terry favorite, right enough. But I mean, apart from adding the sort of a bit of extra jeopardy and a bit more of a race against time for the characters, it actually, I think it does a really interesting thing with the character dynamics because we get to see how they all cope in slightly different ways, or significantly different ways, in fact, because Gan sneaks in to covertly be in the company of Avon, and is it Avon and Callie or Avon and Jenna at that point? I can't remember which, but he doesn't want to be alone and says so. Avon just gets more kind of snappy and irritable, and Villa does exactly the opposite of Gan. He takes himself off somewhere where he's away from the others, so he can't witness the illness, and therefore he can sort of maybe sustain some sort of disbelief that it's actually happening to him as well. And I just think, and at that point, Avon says, "I always knew there was some intelligence in there," or words to that effect, because he actually sees the logic of that one. And I just thought that was some really good character stuff off the back of the radiation. It's not just a plotty thing. So, one other silly bit of business that made me laugh. This was a misheard line. I misheard this. There's one point where Avon says to Villa, he's decided they're going to go make a last ditch attempt to go down to the planet and rescue the whole situation. He says to Villa over the intercom, he says, "Meet me at the teleport in your surface clothes," right? And I genuinely misheard that for a second as "meet me at the teleport in your circus clothes." And because of what Villa has worn, I think the episode before, and will be wearing again later in this episode, I thought, yeah, that's not too far from the mark. No wonder I misheard that. That very colourful patchwork sort of coat thing he was wearing. Anyway, that's just a bit of silliness. But there's Gareth, while it's in my head, you'd said that the monsters in this, the sort of underground monsters, were the Subterrans. I think they might actually in this one be the Phibians. But it's this interchangeable thing, isn't it? Like Terry always does the thing where, the Subterrans are underground and the Phibians are presumably underground and underwater at times. It's his classic.
Am I
thing.
thinking of Project Avalon? I think there might have been
Yes.
Subterrans in that
I think
one.
you are.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Terry.
Subterrans in Avalon, aren't they?
but yeah, but I can see why they absolutely got swapped around in your head, because he's just doing the same thing again, you know.
Yeah.
So, and for a second, I wondered had I got it wrong, but I think I remember hearing Fabian's on that one, and I'm sort of rolling my
Just
eyes.
wait until the Undergroundians turn up in series 2.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Phibians for amphibians. Obviously, he's working on a whole new level now. I take it
Yeah,
all
it's
back.
clever stuff. It's clever stuff. But yeah, so yeah, the whole business with Ensor, I love that whole like underground base. You know, he's been there for years, and he's got quite a cozy wee setup there with his, you know, his little aquarium and his plants and everything, and it creates a nice little bit of, even though he's quite a tetchy sort of character. It's almost like that first Doctor thing where he's sort of endearingly tetchy, and but he cares for his little plants and things, and yeah, I quite liked all that stuff. There's a very good fear reaction in this episode from Jacqueline Pierce when the Fibian, thankfully, shot in quite a limited way, so you don't see what I assume is a fairly ropey costume. Well, you see enough of it, but thankfully less than we might have. Um, and but her fear reaction in that is brilliantly sold, and I think a lesser actress, actress, whatever we say these days, might have actually sort of not let herself show that degree of vulnerability, because obviously Servan's meant to be ruthless and tough and all the rest of it. Um, but what she does by showing that is actually an even more impressive thing, which is the speed at which she recovers and just slots right back into goal orientated, like, you know, eyes on the prize mode straight after. Like, it takes her about 10 seconds to compose. Like, she's not human in this regard, right? And so I thought that was brilliantly. It was a brilliant choice to do it that way. Um, and you know, it is a good job. Like, obviously, Stephen Greif had that injury. I think we were incredibly lucky that what we have of him in the episode is the bookends, you know, so that the last shot we see of him isn't sort of him flat footing about, you know, or you know, some extras legs flat footing about as we see elsewhere. Um, Actually, nearly worse than that is the bit where they're sort of looking at the map, and for a full minute or something on screen, really conspicuously, there's just like Servalan's hands on one end of the map and his on the other, and they're just pointing at different things. Going, so if we go along here and do this and do, and he's got his big, you know, well, the extra playing him as the hands on the map. But it almost looks like neither actor was available there, you know, even though that probably was Jacqueline Pierce. So it's just unfortunate. But thankfully, yeah, we get the film footage of him at the end to sort of soften the blow of all that. So we don't quite have then two paychecks yet for Tottenham on this one. I had actually missed the fact that he wasn't doing the voice of Orac, although I did think, you know, when I first heard Orac's voice in this, I thought, well, that's not quite right. Maybe he sort of practices it between seasons and refines it a bit. But that obviously explains it then, what you said, Gareth, about the other actor playing the voice just for that week. So, well, and then on the subject of Orac himself, you know, what a star turn by, you know, he really sort of comes in and steals the show at the end there, and you can see how much Paul Darrow enjoys playing Avon's fascinated and amused reaction. Like, you can see him going, "Oh, this is brilliant! I'm going to get to do all these lovely close-ups of my unpredictable reactions to what this pedantic little thing is going to say to me every week." So the genesis of it is right there. It is a bit odd. Well, maybe I shouldn't say it's odd, because after all, Orac's name is presumably meant to imply Oracle, you know. But it is a slightly strange feeling debut act for this thing, which at all other points in the series will essentially be like an internet that one person can use at a time, the most inconvenient version of the internet, you know, you can have. But in this, he seems to be doing like a psych. You know, he's fulfilling the role of a psychic, or you know, a fortune teller. And so he makes this kind of prediction of the future. You know, the spaceship will be destroyed, and okay, it makes for a very effective, hey, this series is coming back type ending to the season. But it's certainly an atypical use for Orac, as we'll later discover. Um, yeah, I think those are the main things I have to say. I enjoy it. It's not the strongest. It's not the weakest. It rounds out the series quite nicely, and it's certainly no Star One, as you were saying, Johnson. But for considering like they've just limped over the finishing line with Terry Nation's last post-it notes idea, just about fleshed out into something that'll take them to the final 50 minutes. I think the episode stands up well, and I think it's a nice little button on a pretty solid and very impressive first season overall.
It has been a good season. I've really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed going over it again and talking about it and all that kind of thing. But for me, I do think Series 1 is the weakest of Blake 7. I don't know. It just feels like it's not there yet. Like I say, it's all felt like a prologue. It's all felt like it's going to be something bigger. I've got, the luxury of hindsight and knowing what comes next. And, I genuinely do prefer Series 2, 3 and 4 to 1. But it has been fun. It's been really, really great to go through. And it's been good. So I'm looking forward to moving on to Series 2. Series 2 does sort of, it is more confident. It does do bigger and braver things. We do start killing off regulars, and we get a new Travis, or Travis played by a new actor at least, and it is a slightly different take, and it is kind of explained in universe, and we get the big ongoing storyline that threads through the series. We get Servalan sort of ditching Travis and Travis becoming a fugitive as well. There's some really, really, really great stuff to come, and I'm looking forward to it. But that is all we've got time for now. So, yeah, Series 1 down. We'll be back. I'm sure it won't take us too long. We'll be back to talk about Series 2, probably when the Blu Ray makes it out. We know it's coming. Roll it on. So I will say thank you and goodbye to Mark.
Yep, thanks, bye.
And I'll say thank you and goodbye to Gareth.
Thank you. See you next time.
And we'll be back for more spodcasting very soon. Goodbye now.